Gaming Bolt presents 15 things you need to know before you buy The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild looks like a breath of fresh air, but what exactly is it that makes it look like it could be the kind of generation-defining title the series hasn't delivered in a long time? In this feature, we take a look at the 15 things that make us more excited about this game than anything else. 15 things that we feel will help this game become the kind of transcendent experience we all know it has the potential to be. So, without further ado, let's begin. Inspired by the original Zelda and Skyrim. Game producer Eiji Aonuma has not been shy in naming third-party titles as games that influenced the development of Breath of the Wild, and he has named such titles as Far Cry and Skyrim as his immediate references. That is, to be honest, instantly apparent from the open world and exploration-based nature of Breath of the Wild. However, Aonuma has also stated his main inspiration was the very first title in the series, The Legend of Zelda for the NES, and that in itself is enough to get any Zelda fan excited. It does indeed look like the game will be taking inspiration from the completely open-ended, non-linear structure of the original game, and we're curious to see how it does that in its own unique way. Focused storytelling. The Legend of Zelda games have never been known for their storytelling. That's not to say that they tell bad stories, far from it. The Wind Waker and Majora's Mask, for example, are both incredibly strong in the narrative department. However, the series has always been known more for its game design than anything else. And while it doesn't seem like that as a focus will be taking a back seat in Breath of the Wild, it does seem like the game will have a much more complex story and a much more focused, immersive way of telling it. Aonuma and Miyamoto have both spoken about the game's story at length, and they have made several assurances over the fact that despite the game's completely open-ended nature, it will tell a very focused story. Aonuma has also said that the game will make players cry, and when has that not ever been a good thing? Complete freedom. Taking note of the criticism Skyward Sword received for being a bit too linear and not open enough, and following in the footsteps of the incredible A Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild will be a completely open-ended experience from start to finish. However, not only does Breath of the Wild draw inspiration from its 3D predecessor, it takes its philosophy and cranks it up several notches. Breath of the Wild will allow players to tackle its dungeons, be it the side quest kind or the main story variety, in any order. So much so that you will even be able to tackle the final boss of the game at the very beginning if you want. While A Link Between Worlds had definite acts that you could approach in any order, Breath of the Wild will give you 26 alphabets and say go nuts. How will that exactly work within the framework of the game and its story is a complete mystery. But hey, since when has complete freedom in video games not been a welcome addition? Link cannot be renamed. It has been an unspoken tradition in the Legend of Zelda title since the franchise's inception that Link, the main protagonist of the games, can be renamed by players. Considering the fact that Link has been more of an avatar for the player, a link in a very literal sense to the story and experience, than an actual character, and that has always made sense. But it has now been confirmed that players will not be able to rename him in Breath of the Wild, and that he will explicitly be called Link. All cutscenes in Breath of the Wild are going to be voiced, a first for the series, so it makes sense that the main protagonist cannot be renamed. But does this also mean that Link will be much more of a character in and of himself this time around? It remains to be seen, but the question definitely has us intrigued. Voice acting. Speaking of voice acting, that too is a reason for fans of the series to be even more excited for Breath of the Wild. Voice acting has been, until very recently, a bit of a rarity in all Nintendo games, and even more so in the Zelda titles. So the fact that every single cutscene in Breath of the Wild will be voiced is a very pleasant surprise. This is the first time we'll see voice acting in a Zelda title, so we're incredibly excited to see how it pans out, to finally be able to find out what iconic characters such as Princess Zelda actually sound like. But what is most exciting about this is that it suggests that the game seems to have more of a focus on its story and storytelling than any game in the series has had in the past, and that is an intriguing prospect. No female Link. The discussion of whether or not Zelda titles should allow you to choose Link's gender has been a prevalent one for some time now, and that question has quite predictably been hovering over Breath of the Wild like a cloud. However, the developers have stated in very certain terms that the new Zelda adventure will not feature a female version of Link, citing the desire to keep the balanced duo of Link and Princess Zelda at the core of its story as the main reason. And to be fair, that makes complete sense. Also, considering the fact that Breath of the Wild plans on telling a focused, definite story, and as such doesn't even allow players to change Link's name, it makes sense that players will not be able to choose Link's gender either. Sorry Zelda fans, no Linkle for you this time. Loads of side quests. Side quests have been a major and memorable tradition of Zelda games. That tradition carries over into Breath of the Wild, which will have full 76 named side quests. As for what those side quests are and what their nature will be, that remains to be seen. But let's hope they are along the lines of the side quests in Majora's Mask, fully compelling, fleshed-out mini-stories within the larger story of the game that actively add to the player's experience and enjoyment. Advanced horse riding. In the newest Zelda title, players will no longer be bound to just one single horse, and you'll be able to tame and ride any horse you come across in the open world, meaning you can even tame multiple horses at the same time and register them all in the stables. There's a lot of depth to this mechanic. Apparently, horses will each have defining stats such as strength, stamina, and the bond they will have with the player, and the harder a horse is to tame, the better it ultimately will be at traversal. For a game that's going to be as focused on exploration as Breath of the Wild, it makes sense that horse riding is going to be a fully featured mechanic, and from the looks of it, it's going to be very interesting. Not all dungeons will be themed. Themed dungeons in Zelda have been a thing since A Link to the Past. There's always a water temple in a lake, a fire temple in or near a volcano, a forest temple in a forest, and so on. But Breath of the Wild may be breaking away from that tradition. In an interview, the producer confirmed that Breath of the Wild may not necessarily have themed dungeons. This doesn't mean that there won't be any in the game, period, but it does mean that just because you find an entrance to a dungeon or a temple in the forest, that doesn't mean that it will be the forest temple. Another way the game will keep us on our toes, we imagine. The pleasure of discovery. As we've already discussed, the fact that Breath of the Wild is inspired a great deal by the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is no secret, and Aonuma has mentioned that fact several times. And considering just how great Skyrim was in terms of its open world sandbox structure and its focus on exploration and world building, we'd say it's not a bad inspiration to have. Aonuma has said that he wants Breath of the Wild to have a similar focus on traversal, to provide players with similar moments that highlight the pleasure of discovery via exploration. Of course, none of that would work if there wasn't a well-built, vast game world to build that exploration on, which brings us to our next point. A large open world. The world of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild is going to be massive. The in-game map is going to be a staggering 360 kilometers square, which is by far the largest map in any Legend of Zelda title. It is, in fact, going to be significantly larger than the biggest game worlds we've ever seen outside of the franchise. For reference, the map of Skyrim is 39 kilometers square. Los Santos in Grand Theft Auto V comes in at 81 kilometers square, and The Witcher 3's map has 146 kilometers square, not including DLC. What is even more exciting is the fact that we'll be traversing across all kinds of landscapes, from snowy mountains to volcanoes to lush forests and swamplands. It's safe to say that we're more than just a little excited to explore the shit out of Hyrule. Monolith Soft helped with the game's development. A team of over 100 people from Monolith Soft, the developers of Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X, have been involved in the development of Breath of the Wild, and considering the massive scale of those two RPGs, that is no surprise. Breath of the Wild promises to be the largest game in the Legend of Zelda series to date, so it makes sense that the developers have enlisted the aid of Monolith Soft, whose skill at creating beautiful, expansive worlds is there for all to see. This also isn't the first time they've helped with the development of a Zelda title, having previously contributed to the development of Skyward Sword and A Link Between Worlds. The fact that Monolith are attached to this game just makes us that much more excited to finally get our hands on it. Alternate ending. No, Breath of the Wild won't have multiple branching endings like your typical BioWare title would, but Aonuma has confirmed that if players meet a certain criteria and do some specific things throughout their playthrough, they will get a different ending than the one they normally would. This just goes to show that Nintendo are indeed going for a much larger focus on storytelling than we're used to seeing in Legend of Zelda games. And while we're not sure just yet what the extent of the differences between the original and this alternate ending will be, the prospects definitely have us excited. Not a darker adventure. You wouldn't be blamed for thinking that, as compared to other recent Zelda titles, Breath of the Wild will be a much darker adventure. It is, after all, set in a post-apocalyptic Hyrule, and the trailers we've seen of the game so far look like they're going for a darker tone than we're used to seeing in Zelda, barring maybe Majora's Mask. But Aonuma and Miyamoto have dispelled that assumption in very clear terms. They've mentioned explicitly that Breath of the Wild, despite appearances, won't necessarily be a darker adventure. We've been promised humor, tears, drama, and everything in between. Color us intrigued. The essence of Zelda. Aonuma and Miyamoto, the two people who have the biggest influence on The Legend of Zelda throughout its history, have both gone on record to say that Breath of the Wild captures what is, according to them, the essence of the franchise. For fans of the series who have been disappointed with the recent entries such as Spirit Tracks and Skyward Sword, of which there's plenty by the way, combine that with a massive open world and exploration-based gameplay akin to Skyrim, and we might potentially have a winner on our hands. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Vault, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.